This is going to be my first video update for this Monday, coming to you from Nicosia, Cyprus. Let's talk about the news. So we have another big Kherson offensive that appears to be coming. And the reports that I'm getting is that this is going to be a big one, perhaps the last one for the Ukraine military. NATO is pushing Ukraine. They're pushing the Elensky regime to go full in with regards to taking Kherson and taking Kherson city. Of course, the goal of all of this is to create doubt, division, problems for the Kremlin, for Putin, so that you can get some sort of regime change in Russia, so that you have enough people who are upset with some sort of military loss in Kherson, some sort of territorial loss. People in Russia get upset, certain forces in the Kremlin get upset, and you get some sort of regime change outcome. It doesn't matter for the collective West who or how Putin is removed. That's secondary to them. What matters for them is to create the dynamics so that you can get Putin and his administration out of office. Very much like Syria. You know, you're gonna fund IS. Doesn't matter who they are or what they do. Even the most horrible of forces, the collective West, they'll back them if it means that they can get the desired outcome, which in Syria was Assad must go, and in Russia it is Putin must go. So this is going to be the big one, the big offensive for Ukraine, the one that will lead, in their minds, will lead to this Putin must go dream that they have. So we have the forces, the Ukraine military forces. They're building up in the direction of Kherson and Kherson city. We have the Russians, the Russian military. They are evacuating civilians from the west bank of from the right side of the Dnieper, and they're evacuating them to the left side of the Dnieper in Kherson. And I've read reports where the evacuation is along the lines of 50 to 60,000 civilians that are currently being evacuated from this area. And they're being evacuated because, well, two reasons as to why they're being evacuated. The first reason is because it's going to allow the Russians, who are building formidable defenses. They have formidable defenses in Kherson, but they continue to build formidable defenses. It allows them to fight the Ukraine military as they try to advance and break through, without having to worry about civilian lives and casualties. That's reason number one. But reason number two is because we are getting word that, and this is coming directly from Surovikin, the general of the commander of the entire Russian army in this special military operation. We are getting reports that NATO commanders, they are pushing the Ukraine military to destroy the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, to destroy the dam and to cause mass flooding, which would endanger the lives of many civilians. And so the Russian military, in order to safeguard the lives of the civilians in the Kherson region from what may be the destruction of the Kakhovka dam, they're moving them to the left bank of the Dnieper. And I think I have that right. From the right bank to the left bank. I'll probably want to double check that, but that's what's going on. The defenses for the Russian military, they're preparing. The Ukraine military, the offensive, they are preparing, and this is going to be, from what I understand, a very big battle that's going to take place. Now, the Ukraine military, they seemed to be fine with the fact that they're going to throw as many troops as they can towards the Russian artillery. They are going to suffer very, very heavy losses. This seems to be accepted by the Ukraine military and obviously accepted by their NATO commanders. The Russians understand that they're going to have to inflict heavy damage to the Ukraine military in order to repel their advance. And if they can't inflict enough damage to repel the Ukrainian advance, or if Ukraine throws so many forces in the direction of Kherson that it's just overwhelming, well, it looks like Russia will, if things get bad, if it's too overwhelming, the amount of men being thrown at this front, Russia will indeed give up the territory in order to save Russian soldiers' lives. Russia understanding that the amount of damage they're going to inflict onto the Ukraine military will be so great that they will most likely be able to regain that territory at a later time. Keep in mind, the Russian objectives of this conflict have always been denazification and demilitarization. So if the Russians have to cede territory in order to demilitarize Ukraine, it looks like they will do that. And this is confirmed once again it seems to be confirmed by the Russian Commander General Surovikin. Now, I just want to confirm the movement of civilians, the 50,000 civilians in Kherson. 50 to 60,000 civilians are being evacuated to the left bank of the Dnieper. Yeah, from the right bank to the left bank. The movement of civilians from the right bank part of the Kherson region to the left bank and to other regions of the Russian Federation will take about 6 days. So we're looking at 50 to 60,000 people being moved in the Kherson region. Now, Surovikin gave an interview to ODYSEE 24. It was in Russian, and this is, I believe, his first interview since taking over the unified Russian military in Ukraine in this special military operation. And this interview was quickly translated by the Russian Ministry of Defense in English, and they put this up in the English language fairly quickly. And I find that very interesting. It seems to me that the Russian Ministry of Defense wants everyone in the collective West to hear from General Surovikin. And he said some interesting things. One of the things that he said was the fact that the Russian military will have to make difficult decisions in Kherson. When he was asked about Kherson and what's going on there, he did say that it is, and I quote, a difficult situation. He said that Ukraine launches deliberate attacks at infrastructure facilities and residential buildings located in Kherson. Impacts of HIMARS rockets have damaged Antonovka Bridge and the dike of Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, where the traffic is currently stopped. So he mentioned that the situation is difficult. He mentions that the plan is to destroy Kakhovka Dam. We have got data on the possible use of prohibited methods of war by the Kiev regime near Kherson, on the preparation of a massive missile strike at the barrage of Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, as well as launching a massive indiscriminate missile and artillery attack at the city. Keep in mind, I'm reading you directly from the Russian Ministry of Defense, the English readout. So these are direct quotes from their readout. In these conditions, our primary task is to save lives and health of civilians. That is why, first of all, the Russian army will provide safe departure of the population according to the resettlement program that is currently being prepared by the Russian government. Our further plans and actions regarding the city of Kherson itself will depend on the military and tactical situation. I repeat, has already become very difficult. Anyway, as I have already said, we will process from the necessity to maximally save the lives of civilians and our personnel. We will operate consciously, promptly, not excluding to take difficult decisions. This basically means, if I'm reading this correctly, that Russia is going to fight. They're going to defend Kherson and Kherson City. But if things get bad, they will make difficult decisions, which I take it to mean that they will trade territory for lives, understanding that they will inflict heavy damage on the Ukraine military, and they will then be able to take back that territory at a future date. This has been the Russian plan since the beginning of the conflict. This has been the policy since the beginning of the conflict. It has been slow, deliberately slow. It has been a plan which has revolved around saving manpower, saving weapons, saving civilian lives, and focusing on destroying the Ukraine military. It's very much the military policy, the theories outlined by Clausewitz, which is destroying the army. You destroy the enemy's army first. That's the first thing you do. It's not about territory, it's about destroying the enemy's army. And that appears to be what Surovikin is saying here in this statement, and that has been the Russian policy from the very beginning. It doesn't look like that's going to change, and even in Kherson, that looks like it is going to be the policy. That's not saying that Russia is not going to fight and defend Kherson City and try to repel the Ukrainian advance. It just means that if things get very, very tough, Russia appears to be prepared to give up that territory if things get really bad. And, you know, they may suffer, the Russian military, in giving up the territory. Yeah, it'll be a retreat or a tactical defeat. But the real problem is in the political realm. It's the political side of things. And that is where the regime change, the collective West push for a regime change comes in. Can a defeat in Kherson City, lead to a regime change in Moscow? I don't think so, but the plan is for some sort of takeover of Kiev to lead to that regime change. It would be a big political problem if Kherson is taken over by the Ukraine military. Keep in mind, this is Russian territory. So when Surovikin says that Russia is willing to make difficult decisions, he is conceding that Russia would be temporarily, in my opinion, but they would be giving up what they consider to be Russian territory to an invading army. So the political implications are risky, that's for sure. But, you know, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see if Ukraine can mount a successful advance in Kherson, or if the Russians are in a good position to defend. From what I understand, reading various analysis of the situation, it seems that the Ukraine military is in a good position to advance towards Kherson, but the Russians have formidable defenses as well set up. Surovikin was also asked about the SMO, the general situation of the SMO, by the Rossiya 24 journalist. He said that the situation with regards to the SMO in the area of the special military operation can generally be described as tense. He called it tense, and the collective West mainstream media, they latched on to this word tense, and they said that that Surovikin's description of the conflict as tense is confirmation that the conflict is not going well for Russia. I don't buy into that. I think using the word tense is not a confirmation that Russia is doing poorly or is doing well. I just think it's a general who understands that war is tough, war is difficult, and war is tense. It is a tense situation in Ukraine in general. So I don't understand why the word tense is being viewed as some sort of confirmation that things are going poorly for Russia. But the collective West mainstream media, that's what they decided to run with. Now, Surovikin follows up that statement by explaining how the Russians are fighting this war and how the Ukrainians fight this war. He says the enemy does not leave attempts to attack the positions of Russian troops. First of all, it concerns Kupiansk, Krasny Liman, and Nikolaev Kryvyi Rog direction. Our enemy is the criminal regime that pushes Ukrainian citizens to death. The Ukrainians and we are one people, and we wish Ukraine to be a friendly state for Russia, independent on the West and NATO. Ukrainian regime intends to break our defense. With this purpose, the armed forces of Ukraine, the AFU, are bringing all their reserve forces available to the front line. These are usually territorial defense units that have not been completely trained. So what Surovikin is saying in this statement is that pretty much Ukraine, under the command of NATO and the West, what they're concerned with is territory. And they bring forces up to the front line and they throw them into they throw them at the mercy of Russian artillery in the hopes that they will overwhelm the artillery and be able to gain territory. That is their number one concern. That is what the Ukraine leadership is concerned with. And Surovikin makes it a point to say that Russia is not at war with Ukraine. They want Ukraine to be a friendly state for Russia, but they want it to be independent of the West and NATO. Their enemy, he says, the enemy for them is the regime in Kiev that is pushing their citizens to death. That's the enemy. Our enemy is the criminal regime that pushes Ukrainian citizens to death. Surovikin also says that the enemy suffers with this strategy. The enemy is suffering, this is his quote, everyday casualties from 600 to 1,000 people. That is a huge number. That is not sustainable. And that actually is in line with many of the statements that Elensky has said as well. So that is a direct quote from Surovikin. 600 to 1,000 casualties a day is what the enemy is suffering. Now, Surovikin does say what the Russian strategy is. And he says that the Russian strategy is a different strategy. It has already been mentioned by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. We do not seek high rates of advance, but save every soldier and methodically grind down the attacking enemy. Not only do we minimize our casualties this way, but also considerably reduce the number of victims. Basically what we've been saying on this channel and at the Duran since the beginning of the conflict. Russia's strategy is to methodically grind down, as Surovikin says, the Ukraine army. And by doing this, they move slow, yes, but they also minimize their casualties. And they save the lives of civilians, according to Surovikin. So that was his interview on ODYSEE 24. Fascinating interview. It's interesting to hear from him. And it's interesting that the Ministry of Defense, pushed out an English readout of this interview right away. They obviously want the collective West to hear from Surovikin as well. So that's what's going on in Ukraine. We're going to find out what happens in the next few days and if this is indeed going to be the big final push for the Ukraine military. If the Russians are prepared, if the Russians can successfully defend, if the Ukraine military can successfully break through, and what happens after that? What happens if Russia successfully defends? What happens if Ukraine successfully breaks through? We're going to have to follow this story very, very closely. But it does seem that Ukraine is starting up the offensive. I'm getting reports that things seem to be starting up. So that's going to be the big news going forward, I imagine. Russia continues to hit at Ukraine's electric grid. They haven't stopped. They continue the drone strikes. They continue the missile strikes. They continue to dismantle Ukraine's electric grid. Obviously, Russia has a much bigger plan at play. They are going to defend Kherson. They're going to defend it as best they can, and they're going to defend it to win. But obviously, they have a bigger plan going on, a much bigger plan. And I wonder if the fact that Russia, that Surovikin, is kind of hinting at the fact that that Russia is prepared if things go badly, if things do not turn out their way, that Surovikin is prepared to cede southern territory to Ukraine. If that's an indication that Russia, their bigger plan may not be to immediately go towards Odessa, but perhaps to go towards the center of Ukraine, Dnipropetrovsk and Kiev. Just a thought, because you would imagine that if the plan was for Odessa, if that was their next move, then you would imagine that Russia would, you would probably hear statements from Surovikin saying that Russia will defend Kherson no matter what. They're going to keep that territory no matter what, because you're going to need that territory in order to move further west towards Odessa. So just a thought, just throwing that out there. Let's now move on and talk about the other war, which is the economic war of attrition that is taking place, and that is the war that Europe is just getting pummeled in. That is the conflict for which Europe is crumbling, the economic war. And we talked about demilitarization. How about deindustrialization? The deindustrialization of Germany specifically. And we have some bankruptcies, some closures in Europe and in Germany. And we're not talking about bankruptcies and closures of small or medium-sized businesses. We're talking about big industries that have been around for hundreds of years. Textile supplier for vehicles, Borgers, SE & Co. filed for bankruptcy after 156 years in business. This is Germany. One of the largest soap manufacturers in Europe, Capus, has declared bankruptcy. It was in operation since 1848. Bodetta Sobowaren Confectionery, founded in 1892, filed for bankruptcy. Construction company Wolf Hochfund Ingenieurbau filed for bankruptcy after 125 years due to bottlenecks in personnel and material. Bakery chain Tillman Brot, founded in 1937, declares bankruptcy. Electricity blackout fries computer servers at kitchen designer Airbaken Solutions. This forced the 60-year-old company into bankruptcy. That is the economic deindustrialization war that is taking place. So Russia is fighting a demilitarization of Ukraine, and Europe is deindustrializing itself because of the sanctions that they decided to place on Russia, in the belief that in the first 2-3 weeks, those sanctions would lead to regime change. Now they're hoping that this Kherson offensive will lead to regime change. It's the hope strategy. But I have to admit, the Kherson offensive, if things go well for Ukraine, it's probably the collective West's best bet. I don't see it having the effect that they believe it will have, but their best chance at causing some sort of chaos in the Kremlin would be to take the city of Kherson. That's just my take on things. Now, the sanctions, well, the sanctions are not working well for the EU either, because you have a lot of countries which are starting to push back on more sanctions from the EU, and they're also starting to push back on the implementation of the December oil cutoff that was put in place. I believe it was sanctions package number 5 or 6, where they said that come December, the EU is going to start to clamp down on the supply of Russian oil via ship to Europe. You have Greece pushing back on this. This is crystal clear why Greece is pushing back on this, because it's going to be the Greek shippers that are going to suffer from the cutting off of Russian oil deliveries via ship, via tankers. And so Greece is trying to figure out what to do or how to push back on the sanctioning of Russian oil deliveries via tanker. France is pushing back on sanctioning Russian nuclear fuel. France is undergoing their own energy, electricity, fuel crisis. And there was a general strike yesterday in France. The French people, they're having a hard time filling up their cars and trucks with gas because there is no gas in France. And so the French government is trying to push back on sanctions for Russian nuclear fuel. France is highly dependent on its nuclear energy infrastructure, and for obvious reasons, they would not like to see sanctions on Russian nuclear fuel. And of course, you have Hungary. Hungary is also pushing back on the oil sanctions that are going to come into effect in December. Hungary has been the one country that has been consistent on its pushback with regards to sanctions, but all the countries always do vote those packages into effect. So no matter how much pushback individual member states give with regards to sanctions, they always seem to vote sanctions into effect. So I think I will leave it there, and I will wrap up the video. Let's do a clown world, actually. Let's do a clown world. I'm a little low energy today for some reason. Let's do a clown world to pick things up, to lighten up the mood some. Let's talk about Elensky's book deal. Yes, Elensky is coming out with a book. You know, when they come out with the book deal, you know that's when they're in trouble, right? Whenever that book deal is on the way, to me, it always signals the end is near, because that's the final, cash in. That's when they're going to cash in, is when they come out with that book deal. That means that they've exhausted everything else, all the other avenues to line their pockets with. They've exhausted everything. Things are coming to an end with regards to whatever the grift is that they've been pulling. And I'm talking about celebrities or politicians, whatever it is. And so your final move is to come out with that book before everything collapses and you disappear. You come out with that book deal, which is going to give you the final couple of million that you want to put into your pocket. And so Elensky, no different than other actors and politicians who employ this book deal technique, he is coming out with a book, The 16 Most Powerful War Speeches by Ukrainian President Vladimir Elensky. It's going to be published on December 6th in a book called A Message from Ukraine. Crown, a division of the multinational publisher Penguin Random House, made this announcement on Monday. The only book officially authorized by President Zelensky, A Message from Ukraine, includes speeches he has personally selected to tell the story of the Ukrainian people. The abstract of the hardcover, which is already available for pre-ordering for $16, says. A message includes an introduction by Zelensky in which he explains what he has learned about himself and Ukrainians since the launch of the Russian military operation in late February. If you want to understand who we are, where we are from, and what we want, and where we are going, you need to learn more about who we are. The book will help you do that, the Ukrainian leader said in a statement released by Crown and quoted by the media. So there you have it. Elensky's book. The book, which also features a preface by Arkady Ostrovsky, the Economist's editor for Russia and Eastern Europe, will be released in the UK, US, Germany, Spain, and Portugal, according to The Guardian. All of the proceeds from the book will go to United 24, a platform set up by Elensky to raise charitable funds for his country. So it's going to go to the slush fund, the United 24 slush fund, where he also had $100 million in crypto donated as well. Anyway, that's the book deal from Elensky. I'm sure it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. I'm sure it's going to be on the top of the list for Amazon. The algorithms will make sure that it gets to the top of the list. And yeah, that's the clown world. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, everybody. The Duran.locals.com. Look for us on Rockfin as well. And I will end the video there. Take care.